So, haven't seen you for a while. Nice to see you.
Yeah, great. Good to see you.
And our object here is to chat about what we've done, make sure everybody's understanding what we've done, answer any questions that we've got. And and I don't have a choreography for this event. I
Mm.
think we can do whatever it is that we want to do. If you've got questions, maybe we can start there, or I can say what it is that we've found, I think, or we can speculate
Yeah,
about that or
we
chat
can
about that.
speculate. Let's curious to hear what you guys think.
Well, we have if we were doing a regular research project kind of a thing, we would do what we call a green meeting and then a rectification meeting. And a green meeting is basically we go back through all of the samples that we have gotten and try to bring them back to mind because we've been sampling now for several months and uh, and as a general procedure in our work, the samples from the first few days are a long time ago, and so we have a hard time remembering those, and B, we didn't really understand as a general rule what experience was. Our participants generally have a hard time describing it. We have a hard time understanding it, so it takes us a few days. So we go back and we try to review all those kinds of things, and and then and then we try to characterize what it is that we found. And what I would and then we do a more formal kind of that characterization. So we've done a green meeting. Amber and I have done the green meeting, and then we go back through those samples again. The result of the green meeting basically is that we either in the green meeting or thereafter we characterize what we think sort of the main features are, and then we go back through the samples again and bring those features that we have sort of uh, advanced as being what we call the ideographic, and that's a fancy word that just means personal to Tristan. This is a characteristic of Tristan regardless of the rest of the world. That's what we call ideographic. But then we go back, so we generate what we think are ideographic characteristics, and then we go back and apply those characteristics to every one of Tristan's samples to see whether the characteristics need to be refined or adjusted or whatever, or we missed something, or there are samples that don't fit. So that's basically where we are. And what I would say about the results of those, which is that most of your samples were complicated or complex or something. That there was what I would say, and I guess before I get too far down the road here is I don't want to be understood as being saying, well, this is the truth with a capital T about Tristan's samples, and so if you've got clarifications or disagreements or amplifications or whatever, we'd be delighted to hear them. But what I would say is that your samples were almost all, or maybe all, complicated or not clearly focused. There was not just one thing. I was, you had very few samples with something like, I was saying to myself in my inner voice, quote, "I'll have a hamburger, please," unquote. And that was it as far as your experience. That is not the way your experience was. Your experience had multiple strands, and even within those strands, it was things that were sort of hard to know exactly what the focus was. I guess we knew what the focus was, but what the details were, even within the strands. So that was one characteristic. Another characteristic was you frequently had words that you latched onto. And that's an unusual characteristic from our DES experience, but by latching onto, I think we all understand what that is. But you might be listening to a podcast, and the podcaster was saying something, and you'd be hearing with understanding and continuing to hear understanding with what the podcaster was saying, but you were somehow keeping in mind a word or words from what the podcaster recently said, maybe the last words of the last sentence, not necessarily the last words, some number of words that continued in your experience while the podcaster's stream of words continued on. And that was not necessarily a podcaster. It was when a friend of yours was speaking, and maybe even when you were speaking or when you were reading. So when you were reading, sometimes you would latch onto words as you continued on to read. And that's a fairly unusual content of experience, I would say. But I would also say that it is, in my understanding and my own personal theory, sort of related to anxiety, that the non-anxious people experience words and the words come at them, and they're processing the words and extracting the meaning out of them, and that's sort of an automatic thing in the verbal community. When people talk, other people apprehend. That's what is sort of everyday non-anxious understanding. But people who are anxious, at least some people who are anxious, and I don't have big samples of this, so this is my own personal theory here. You can take it or leave it. But I have sampled with a number of anxious people who, what I have called the doing of hearing. So instead of just hearing as being a receiving operation, it's like I got to go out and grab this thought, this stream that's coming at it. I have to go meet it rather than just wait for it to arrive or so. And in my thinking, which is not to say everyday psychology thinking, because everyday psychology thinking doesn't really think like this, but in my understanding, that's related to anxiety. Why that is, I'm not exactly sure. Whether it's a cause of anxiety or the result of anxiety, or has nothing to do with anxiety. It's just been luck that I have happened to seen a couple of people like that. I don't really know.
Really interesting.
So what I would say about that is that most people, and by most people I mean most non-anxious people, feel words, when somebody else is speaking words, the person is just receiving them. And then when they're talking, they feel themselves to be guiding the words, creating the words. They're the creator of the words. And the anxious people, at least some anxious people seem to have that sort of backwards. So when they're talking, the words just seem to roll out, and they're not guiding those words. But when they're hearing, they have to somehow feel like they have to meddle with the words or capture the words or something, rather than just have those words come in and stick. So I would say, sort of content-wise, those are the two major characteristics, three, I guess, if we.
Now, what of the body and somatic parts of it?
So I would say we saw there many samples. Many of your samples had what we called, I forget what we called it, inchoate bodily anxiety or something like that.
Diffuse bodily anxiety.
Sorry?
We can inchoate inner seeing and diffuse bodily anxiety.
Diffuse bodily anxiety. Yeah. Where there were quite a few samples where it seemed like there was anxiety going on that was bodily, but you wouldn't, or whatever, say where in the body it was. So it seemed like this was a bodily sensation, but it wasn't like in my chest or in my neck or in my hands or wherever. It seemed somehow bodily. And that's somewhat unusual. I would say most people, when they think something is in their body, they can say, well, it's in my chest or whatever. Not everybody, but. And I would say it wasn't as frequent as I had understood, you had understood before sampling began. I understood that you had thought that you thought of yourself as being in pain or bodily discomfort or whatever all the time, or nearly all the time. And we didn't find that. We found that actually pain, we found pain a few times, but not very often.
Yeah.
And, but a sort of a bodily anxiety semi-often, by no means half the time. But it was like a quarter or a third or something like that at the time.
Now, what can we learn from that? Because we, does that mean I wasn't experiencing pain at that moment or consciously experiencing pain, or does that, if say it wasn't in the sample at that moment?
Well, I'd be interested in what you think about that. I would say the answer to that is that that at most of the samples you were not directly apprehending pain.
Mm.
But when you retrospect yourself as always apprehending pain. And those are different kinds of things.
Now, I would also say in most of the samples I wasn't directly apprehending vision either. Like there wasn't a strong visual content towards most of them, right?
I think that is basically correct. But that is not unusual.
Right.
Most people have their eyes open most of the time when they're sampling. And very often people's experience is more about what they're creating on the inside. I was thinking about that, or seeing a visual image of that, or feeling this, or whatever. Their eyes are open, they're paying attention in the sense that they're skillfully moving through the world, but it's not directly apprehended.
Yeah, so maybe for me, I feel the pain is working in a certain way. I mean, I was surprised by how little visual content there was sometimes. But what was I going to ask? So it seems that there's something. How do you define the unconscious? Like, what model do you have for how the unconscious, or supposition basically for how the unconscious works? Say, because if we're driving a car and we're not directly thinking about our experience of what we're seeing, I assume we're still unconsciously seeing, or we're seeing at some level beneath that of direct experience, right?
So so if you're asking me what I think,
Mm.
is that your question? You want to know
Yeah.
What Russ Rolbert thinks about that? Which is, so I'm going to tell you what I think about that, and that is that I think that the unconscious and conscious is a artificial distinction on the world, and that isn't, and in the when the inner experience is understood directly, we won't be worried about things like conscious and unconscious. I think it's much more, the world is, the human world, I think, this is my own thinking, I think we are multiprocessors, and we're doing all kinds of stuff all the time, and we're doing it skillfully. Right now, I'm sitting on a chair, and I'm not falling off of the chair because I'm skillfully processing the chair. And I wouldn't say that processing is unconscious. I would say I got a proprioceptive way of organizing the world that keeps me sitting on chairs when I'm sitting on chairs, and a whole lot of other skills that my complex set of neurons and synapses and glial cells and bones and muscles and whatever all know how to work. And driving is that way. So I have a driving skill, and I can be totally engrossed in the conversation. If you were in my car, we could be having a conversation. I'd be driving skillfully, stopping at the lights, weaving in and out of traffic, doing whatever else that I have to do, and have it. And if you beeped me at any of those times, the driving portion of it wouldn't have been in my experience. But it's not because there's a conscious and a unconscious. At the same time as I'm weaving in and out of traffic, I'm also sitting in the chair and adjusting my posture when I've pushed down on too long on that glute or whatever, and paying attention to the temperature and turning up the air conditioner when it's too cold and whatever. All that stuff is I'm processing that, not consciously or unconsciously, but I'm processing that. And at the same time, I'm no doubt thinking about the war in Gaza and the parade in Washington and whatever else happens to be still occupying some subset of my neurons. And, but it seems like there is one stream that's conscious, and I just don't think it's true. And I think your sampling, one of the reasons I think your sampling is interesting for people to understand it is that there was no one consciousness in your experience almost ever. And one could argue, if one were a consciousness theorist, which I'm not, is that, well, there was a conscious in his consciousness. There's one kernel of consciousness, and it gets divided up into 4 strands or whatever. I think that's possible. I'd bet against it if I had to bet, but what I think is that there's all kinds of strands that are going on, more or less like spaghetti in a bowl, and I can take a bite out of that spaghetti, in which case I get this strand and that strand and this meatball, and that makes it seem like that was the important organization, but it's just that's the organization that I happen to get at a particular time.
Right.
And I also think that it's the confusion between the self-characterizations or self-theories or whatever. I understand myself to be in pain all the time, or I understand myself to be thinking about this all the time, or whatever. I mean, Amber is working with a bunch of people with obsessive-compulsive disorder. The people are confused about the distinction. Almost everybody, maybe, because I'm working with some philosopher people, and a lot of people are substantially confused about what are the characteristics of their own inner experience. And I think being confused is difficult.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, see, it's hard for me to give up the idea of being in pain all the time. I do, because after sampling, the way I saw it was, oh, maybe I don't have this direct experience of pain all the time, but I have sort of like driving a car. That's kind of how I saw the pain operating underneath. And I saw the pain sort of more exhibited as anxiety in most samples. But, and then what I thought was interesting was it seems that there are certain moments where you think about something consciously and maybe it brings it up in a way, but maybe this is just self-theorizing, so maybe we can discard all this, but for me it sort of makes me it sort of still brings up more questions. I don't feel like I've found the solution as neatly perhaps as you might have thought regarding the pain, but I don't know if that makes sense at all. Maybe it doesn't. But.
So let me say what I was reacting to, which might be the same thing that you were saying, and it might be off to the side or whatever. But what I would say about your anxiety is that you said pretty frequently, I think, actually during the sampling, that you had some what you might call free-floating anxiety. It was just a sort of a general anxiety. It wasn't about anything particular happening. And then if some particular event happened, that free-floating anxiety would sort of coalesce around the event, and then it would become a particularized anxiety, no longer free-floating, but I was anxious about this. But it wasn't like that anxious about X, whatever that was, came out of nowhere. It was a organization of the anxiety that was sort of underlyingly already there. That's the way I understood that.
Yeah.
And what I understood you to be saying about the pain is that maybe the pain is an underlying organization of the anxiety.
Yeah, it's not the cause, because I certainly had the same anxiety before I had the pain, but I feel like I feel like the two were related, because I would be having more anxiety when I could look at that moment and say, oh, I was having more pain perhaps at that moment, like for example. But anyways, go on with what you were saying before. Perhaps maybe it's better.
Well, I think I got to the sort of the end of that thought. The but I guess I was reacting to what you were just saying is, it wasn't part of our contract, or if you could say that or part of my expectation that I was going to solve, or this exercise was going to solve your pain issue.
Right.
That was, would have been happy to have that happen, but that was I think if there were a mature science of inner experience, which I think we're just a very long way away from, but if there were, then maybe we would know what to do about Tristan's pain. That we could say, well, he's got this kind of pain, he's got that kind of experience, and this is the kind of experience that leads to that kind of a pain. And what he ought to do about that is, I don't know, yoga or mindfulness based on sensory awareness, or whatever. I don't know the answer to that, because I don't think the science knows the answer to that. And so I would say I see what we have done as sort of at the foothills of that, and we're trying to make sense of something in a field where we don't really know nearly enough to be able to make sense of it. Maybe never will make sense of it, or maybe we will make sense of it. That would be, your generation's problem, not mine, or whatever, and figure that out.
Right. Interesting.
If I had to guess, I would guess that the kind of thing that we have done, the sampling that we have done, is probably the most therapeutic thing that you could do. But I don't actually know that I really think that it might be true, but I don't really know. So what would you say actually about your pain? Is your pain better, worse, the same as it was 3 or 4 months ago when we started this?
Well, I certainly wasn't trying to solve the pain either, to be honest. I was just curious because it deals with self-conception versus actual experience. And in after the samplings, I always felt that maybe there is a type of experience that exists beneath direct experience, whether we want to call it the unconscious or some sort of like inchoate unconscious or the sort of conscious or something. I always felt that there are always aspects to it that escape direct sampling, especially for me. But maybe that is, maybe that is I'm willing to cast that. That's sort of like a hypothesis for me. I'm definitely not certain about that. The thing I'm certain about is I do feel the pain, that the pain has not changed from the beginning. I would certainly say I don't think the pain was the primary source of my anxiety throughout the discussions either. I think the source of the anxiety is more so social anxiety or anxiety around my work, etc.
Yeah. So as for the portion, is there stuff that's underlying what DES produces? I have no doubt about that. I think I've been pretty totally forthcoming with you and everybody else. I don't think DES gets to the essence of Tristan. It gets to what Tristan happens to have experienced at that time. And I think that's likely to be important. But I'm not sure about that. And B, in what way it would be important once we know how it's important. I think I would be surprised when I figure out when it is discovered how and for what it is important. But the essence of Tristan, I think, is beyond our ability to grasp. That doesn't make it unimportant. It makes it something else. So I think what we have done is, in a way, sort of like blood pressure. We can measure your blood pressure, and there's some importance to blood pressure measurement. It doesn't get to the essence of Tristan, but it might have some importance to something. And I think DES is a sort of a differentiated blood pressure measure or something like that. It attends to something which is related to, in some fundamentally important way, what Tristan does. But what that relationship is, I don't think I know, and I'm not sure that most physicians who are prescribing blood pressure medication know either. Some theory that says these things are connected.
So I'm curious about, you mentioned the term inchoate interceding. I'm curious what that is.
Interseeing. Inchoate interseeing. So you had several samples where you felt like you were seeing an image, innerly seeing something, but the thing that was being seen was either not present or was only present sort of sketchily, or what I'm preferring to call inchoately. There's a hint of a thing seen, but it's not there. You had, I think, one or two fairly clear interseeings.
Right.
Right now, it's escaping me what they were, but
one was Emily's apartment.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the examples.
But even that wasn't completely clear.
Right. Exactly.
So there are people, many people actually, who on occasion innerly see, and when they innerly see, as best I can tell with as careful reporting as I've done with you, so you know how confident I'm going to be about these things, but those folks are seeing totally differentiated visual imagery. So I don't think it's a question just of vocabulary, in the sense that Tristan is speaking broadly about his inner seeing, and other people are speaking particularly about their inner seeing. I think the inner seeing is different.
Yeah.
And there are some people who innerly see all the time. That's every beep they're innerly seeing something. And what the import of that is, I think, is still, that's the kind of thing that what I'm calling a mature science of inner experience would know the answer to. What I think the work that we are part of here is, I think it's trying to lay out, look here, humanity, science, interested people, whatever. There are big differences between people, and those differences are important, and they're not merely linguistic reporting style differences. And that, I think, organized psychology doesn't really know, and so I've been trying to lay out examples. Well, this is one kind, this is another kind, this is another kind. We should at least, if you're going to have a theory of people, you should really at least know that these are what kind of people you should be having a theory about.
I'll agree with that.
And I think it's fundamentally important. So I think the scientific community has been heading in the direction of dehumanizing people for quite some time, maybe forever, but for quite some time. And the effort that we're involved in is sort of the opposite of that. We, as I conceptualize it, I think we have tried to describe one guy at a time, Tristan in this case. We have tried to describe with care, with genuineness, a few samples of Tristan's experience. And then if we decide that we're willing to put these on the web, then other people can look at them and we'll say, well, Tristan is certainly different from Mel, or different from the other people who were out there. And then once it's established that there are differences, then science would have to figure out, well, so there are experiential differences. What to make of it? What difference does that make?
Right.
So that's the sort of the big picture there. And I guess I would amplify on what I was saying earlier on, that I think it is mentally healthy, whatever that means. And I don't hold myself up as a arbiter or judge or whatever of what is mentally healthy, but it does seem to me that being clear about your own inner experience, having clear inner experience, is generally a good thing. And by good, I don't mean good with a capital G. I mean health, productive, whatever.
Yeah.
And some people just naturally end up with clear inner experience, and some people don't. And why is that? Well, that would seem to me to be a sort of a fundamentally important question, and I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Whether it's genetic, we could say, the genes made the hippocampus have a left turn in it, and if you got a right turn in it, you end up with this kind of stuff, or in a left turn, you get that kind of stuff. I don't have any idea about that. Not sure that's the best way to think about it, even. But I have encountered some people whose inner experience became sort of dramatically clearer than it was. And when that happened, they seemed to be a whole lot mentally happier, healthier, whatever.
So you think I would be mentally healthier if my inner experience were clearer and less inchoate?
I think that's what I think. I don't know whether that's true. So I want to make clear that that's the distinction. I don't know whether that's true. I think it's true.
Mm.
That a clear distinction that I'm trying to make here? I'm I I feel like I owe it to you to be as honest with you about what I think as I can be, because I've asked you to be honest with me about what your experience is. So it seems like I got to answer your question.
Mm.
But I also want to, part of the answer to that question is I have to be honest about my own limitations about that. I don't really know the answer to that question.
Mm.
That's what I think.
Well, you did a study with people with bulimia, right? And did they have like dozens of things going on at the same time?
Some did, yes. And I would say for some of them, the paying attention to the world and of their own inner experience as DES requires, which is to slow it down and let's stick with this experience and then again with this experience and keep with this experience for 10 or 15 minutes. For some people, that seemed to make their bulimia better.
Mm.
Whether that's because their experience changed or because of the force of my personality or because it was the phase of the moon or whatever, I don't really know the answer to that question. That is the fundamentally important question, or a fundamentally important question. And what we have done here is one grain of sand in the sandbar of the answer to that question, I think.
Interesting.
Let me look through my notes and see whether we're...
What do you think, Amber?
I think about like inner experience and mental health.
Sure, yeah.
Um, I think what we've seen so far is, and I want to be careful not to extend my reach too far, but I think that what we pathologize people as, or what we think pathology looks like, seems to somehow look like different inner experience. What that means, I don't know. If that's true, I also don't know. I just think that that's something that we've kind of seen with people. You know, I think an example is when people are scrolling on their phones, we often see that there's nothing in their experience, something like that. So why are people scrolling on their phones all the time? That's beyond us, but I think that there's something to be said about that. I don't know if that really answered your question, but that's kind of what I think about this whole deal. But yeah.
Yeah. I would say that's probably why I scroll, to have more nothing.
I think that's quite possible. That's why most people scroll, or drink, or take drugs, or whatever, and, to get closer to nothing. I guess I'm looking through my notes. I was looking through my notes while you all are talking, and the one thing that I have not said today that I thought was a characteristic of your experience is there are many people, maybe most of the people that I sample with, make a fairly clear distinction between when they're cognizing or thinking or whatever and when they're feeling. So the word thinking generally means something and the word feeling generally means something else for most people. People get confused at the edges of that. But you had experiences that were somewhere in the middle ground, or both of, or undifferentiated cognitive and affective at the same time. And I guess I think about that in sort of the same thing about the inchoateness, or the lack of making things come together as one thing, you are responding to the things that most people would call feeling, and responding at the same time to what most people would call thinking, and ending up with something that seems like thinky-feely stuff.
Yeah, it's hard for me to differentiate the two.
Yeah. And I would say with all humility, I guess is the word, I don't think I'm in a position as one individual, one guy, talking about me personally here, I'm not in a position to know what's good or bad with a capital G on it. You know, with the difference between what is good and evil, I think there is good and evil, but the knowledge of good and evil is a pay grade way higher than mine. I think the Bible's got it right. I'm no biblical scholar, but thou shalt not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or something like that. And I think that's right. So I don't know whether it's a good thing to have cognitive affective awareness. I don't know whether it's a good thing to have, frequent inchoate experiences. It's, you might very well be operating at a higher level of consciousness than I am capable of conceptualizing. I am not in a position to judge that. That doesn't mean that there is not an answer to that question. It just means that Russ isn't the guy to be able to say this is what is good and that's what's not good.
Yeah, I mean the high level of inchoate experience, I guess, is not. It's interesting to hear that confirmed that that's not how most people operate. I mean, I sort of knew how that's always how I operated. I'm always trying to crystallize inchoate experience and turn it into something more concrete, and that's sort of, that only happens, it might not happen one day, it might happen another, and when I really does, then I get some value out of that. I think that's probably why I'm a scholar, because I'm trying to turn the inchoate into something concrete and expressible. But it is sort of the source of my social anxiety, that I can never express how I feel to people, and I never exist directly with them. I only operate in a form of anxiety that's removed from direct interaction with people.
Yeah, I think social anxiety is really common, but I think there's a lot of different kinds of social anxiety, and I think it comes from a lot of different kinds of experience.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of thing that it would be nice to know more about, and it isn't going to be found by giving people questionnaires, and
right.
So I think we got to do better than that, and this is my attempt, I guess I would say, to do better than that. So I do have one line of questions, and that is, shall we make this stuff public? And if the answer to that is a tentative yes, this is what we would do. I think I've already sent you everything except the video for day 9, which I haven't been back to my university office since that time, so I haven't put day 9 yet on the web. When I do, I'll let you know. But if we're in agreement that there's a possible yes to the answer to the question that I just asked, then I would make a website that looks similar to the kinds of websites that I've got a collection of out there for Mel and Carrie and Michael Pollan and a bunch of other people. I would make something like that in a private way and circulate that amongst us, so that when it's done, you could say, well, this is exactly what it would be before I turn the switch and make it public. And at any time up until the end of that time, you can say, I changed my mind, and now that I see the whole thing, I don't want to have any part to do about that. So what I guess I'm looking at, my question at the moment is, do we have tentative approval to advance to the final approval stage?
Sure. I could probably even give you final approval, but if you want tentative first, we will start with tentative.
Well, I would rather wait for the final approval, because for a whole variety of kinds of reasons, but they all come down to the same kind of a thing, and that is, I want to make sure that so we are contemplating putting on the internet for anybody to see and comment on and do whatever crap people do on the internet, some things which are fundamentally privately Tristan's, and I want to do that in as slow a procedure as I can. So, for example, I'll make this whole website. I think we've gotten that far. I'll make this website. Take me a week or so to do it, probably, or maybe more. There's work to be involved in doing that, and then I'll send you all a link, and then you can send that link to whomever you want to send it to, seeking whatever advice you want to seek about it. Is this a good idea to put this out there or whatever? And you should have the right to consult whomever that you want to have in whatever cool hour you would like to have before you make something which is fundamentally privately Tristan anything more than that.
Okay, yep, then you have my tentative approval in that case.
Okay. And I happily accept the risk that is for me. The risk for that is for me that I would spend time and you would eventually say no, thank you, or whatever. And I have done that, and people have said no, thank you, and that's the price to be paid for the game that we're playing here. That's the admission price from my point of view.
Let's go ahead.
Okay. And then, and somewhere along in there, Amber, you and I probably ought to count some of the stuff so we can at least provide some ballpark. So when we say there's frequent this, we should be able to say what we mean by frequent. And is there anything else that we should be talking about today? And I would say we don't need to conceptualize when this conversation ends that if tomorrow or whenever Tristan says, "Well, should I really wanted to ask him that or tell him that or what?" Then we could do this again. This is.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, but otherwise this would be a sort of last conversation for this session, and I just give you the approval for the final one by email or something? Or?
Yeah, probably. But there aren't any rules about this game. It's
No, I mean, this sounds good. I guess we should say our goodbyes for now. I think this has been a pretty enlightening experience for me, and I appreciate you guys spending so much time with my brain.
Well, I appreciate it, and Amber can speak for herself. But I think the work that we're doing is a contribution. So as best I can align myself with what I think is the good thing is the good with a capital G, which this is as close as I can get to that. Whether I'm right about that, I don't know. But it's
been great.
This is it.
Who knows? I may write about DES in the future. try to do something like Caracciolo did, even though I'm not really a cognitive film guy. But
So I would say that's your property. What you have done is up to you. And if you write something about it and I disagree with what you write, then I would have the right to write something in response to that or whatever.
no.
But that's you should have the freedom, and particularly what's out there on the web, you should have the freedom to. And just about everything is out there on the web, including I would probably put this interview out there as part of the deal.
Right.
And I would also say that once you see everything out there on the web, if there's some particular piece of it that you would say, well, you can do everything but that, or you got to redact that, or whatever, we can do that. Redaction is possible in a lot of different ways,
Yeah. Yep. Sounds good.
Alrighty. So anything else we should be talking about today?
I'm good. I'm happy.
Excellent. I would like you to send me the beeper back.
Oh, right.
And I will email you an address to send that to me. Very good. Yeah. I guess the email that's at the bottom of every one of my emails, that address is probably good.
A broken beeper.
Yeah, you don't need to send me back the earphone. Just send me back the beeper.
45OS South Maryland. Okay.
Right.
Cool.
4505 South Maryland Parkway.
Cool.
Thank you so much for all your time.
Thank you.
I appreciate it, Tristan, and I will be in touch with you when I have made the next step. But it's there's a fair amount of time involved, so and I don't know what else I have to do between now and then. So
Look forward to reliving the trauma. No, just kidding. Thanks, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Alrighty, thank you very much. My pleasure. The whole